while doing the research for this and looking around at some Christian apologetics sites, I found no less than 4 foolproof Christian argument against atheism, and every one of them said exactly the same thing. Atheism's claim to know that there is no God. No, we don't. At least not anybody I know. There are, I'm sure, a few who do, and there are some philosophical arguments to try and prove that no God could possibly exist. But you can't come up with a general argument against atheism and start with a premise which is completely and utterly false. At most, you could say some atheists claim. But people, like I said at the beginning, have reached their atheism or theism, their beliefs, through different means. There are a lot of people who would say that they're an atheist who've never really stopped to consider any of the arguments. To them, it just made sense. There are others who were fed up and frustrated and saw that religion was silly and not for them, and they're atheists. And there are some people who just intuit the position that there is no God, and therefore I'm an atheist. And, that's all fine, but when you're talking about what things really mean and making arguments for and against positions, that kind of general statement from a false premise is really not very helpful. Thomas Huxley in 1869 coined the term agnostic to describe individuals who are unconvinced or non-committal about the existence of deities. And Gnosticism refers to knowledge, whereas theism refers to belief. And I've always held that it's possible to be an agnostic theist, an agnostic atheist, a Gnostic theist, or a Gnostic atheist, because part of that is what you believe and part of it is what you know. And it comes down to, I don't believe there's a God, but I don't know it for sure. Or I don't believe there's a God, and I believe that I know this for sure. Huxley and agnostics don't really like it when the word's used that way, because it pollutes the meaning that he implied, which was a non-committal position, or actually in some cases the position that the answer is unknowable. And something that it may cheapen their position. Personally, I find that most of the people who claim to be agnostic, at least most of the ones I've met, are actually atheists. They're just uncomfortable with either the word atheist or confused about the actual meaning, because they hear, for instance, arguments from Christians or whatever. Atheists say there is no God, and somebody who doesn't believe in a God says, "Whoa, I don't know that, so I guess I'll be an agnostic." The fact of the matter is, if you do not believe in a God, you're an atheist. You don't have to say so, but it's true. So throughout history, there have been a number of arguments in an attempt to prove that, through logic and reason, that there is a God. I'm going to start with one that Russell and I got hit with on the show a while back, and we completely screwed it up because we confused which argument it was about. And it's the ontological argument, which was the product of St. Anselm. And it's based on the concept of a being greater than any other being could possibly be. On some level, this ends up boiling down to God exists because I can imagine it, but that's not really fair to the argument. It can be. A short general version of the ontological argument goes, God is the greatest possible being and thus possesses all perfections. Existence is a perfection. Therefore, God exists because we've defined him to be perfect. And perfect, therefore, includes existence, so it must happen. There's a longer version of the argument where God is an entity greater than any other. The concept of God exists in human understanding. And then the third premise is that God does not exist in reality, and that only exists so that it can be refuted.
So this is an argument by contradiction.
Yes.
Argument from absurdity.
Right. The concept of God existing in reality exists in the human understanding as well. If an entity exists in reality and in human understanding, if it exists in my head and for real, that would be greater than the one that just exists in my head. And since we already defined the one that exists just in my head as greater than anything else, then it can't be true that it exists only in my head. It must also exist in reality. It's confusing if you're not reading it, and I didn't try to convolute this on purpose. when it was originally
Well, to be fair,
created.
you have to go for that kind of weird stretch if you want to claim that you're logically proving the existence of God.
Right.
It's like this annoying guy in high school who always used to come up to me and tell me he could prove that 1 equals 0. You know,
Yeah.
He came up with all these things where the divide by 0 was cleverly hidden deep inside one of the terms.
Yeah. You see a lot of things like
The
that.
more
And-
confusing something is, the easier it is for some people to not look for
to not see
where
the flaw in it.
contradictions are.
If I tell you that apples are blue, and the sky is mirrored, there's obvious things in there for you to see. But if I do some tap dancing to hide it, and a lot of people have accused the ontological argument of being that kind of tap dance, both in the sense that. First, it doesn't refer to a specific God. It refers to a concept of God which is defined as every possible perfection, which could be the equivalent of pantheism. As soon as you include every possible perfection, you may have specifically included everything in the universe, everything that exists or could exist. So there's an element of that. There's another argument that existence is not a property. This was first found in Gassendi's objections to Descartes' meditations, because this wasn't originally supposed to be a logical argument. It was just supposed to be a meditation, something for you to sit and ponder about the existence of God. And later this was also modified by Kant. Existence is not a perfection. It's not a property. Perfection is something, existence is binary. Something either exists or it doesn't. Perfection is a scale where you have degrees of proceeding towards perfection. And the argument is that anything which has the property of being non-existent could not possibly have any other properties because it doesn't exist. So it's the ontological argument includes on some levels definition manipulation, switching the text of we have one concept of God, which is kind of subtly substituted for another context later on. My favorite, though, is Douglas Gaskins did an argument in the style of the ontological argument to show, using the exact same methods, that God doesn't exist. And that is, and it's actually simpler and easier to understand. The creation of everything in existence, we're going to, as our initial premise, we're going to say that the creation of everything is the most marvelous achievement imaginable. I can buy that.
Okay.
The merit of a given achievement is the product of A, its intrinsic quality, and B, the ability of its creator. The greater the disability or handicap of a creator, the more impressive the achievement. For a 3-year-old to paint something that looks like a Rembrandt, that's a significant achievement. For a one-legged man to run the quarter mile in 3 seconds or so is absurd. But as the disability increases, the impressiveness of the creation increases. The most formidable handicap for a creator would be non-existence. Therefore, if we suppose that the universe is the product of an existent creator, we can conceive of a greater being, namely one who created everything without ever existing in the first place. Therefore, God does not exist.
I like Jeff D's comment on this argument that it's kind of silly to say that perfect things have to have every good quality. I mean, by that logic, God should be an excellent floor polish. And,
yes.
And putting him on your ribs should make them taste extra delicious.
Oh, man. There's a kind of a similar argument to the ontological argument. It's been deemed the mathematical argument, and it's just about as absurd and isn't in any, I have never seen this in any strict logical form of premise and conclusion, but it defines God as the absolute infinite, a mathematical concept which exists in our head. I mean, you couldn't count to infinity, but we have a concept of infinity, and therefore, because we have this concept of infinity, it must exist somewhere as part of a set, and therefore somebody has gone ahead and decided to define God as that concept.